The forklift engines went quiet first. Then the whispers. Owen Whitfield stood on the dock floor at Falcon Freight, phone in his fist instead of his badge, while Preston Kane read the termination notice like a man enjoying it. 9 years, gone in 4 sentences. Owen didn't argue. He unclipped his badge, set it on the folding table, and walked into the parking lot. He dialed one number. 3 rings, Marsh and Cole. Authorization code. Please, Whitfield, activate the control clause, now. 20 minutes later, Preston Kane's phone rang. He would never sit in that office again. Stick around. The truth in this one takes its time catching up with the man who buried it. That morning had started like every other morning for 9 years, which was to say it started with silence and a coffee maker that groaned before it ever poured. Owen Whitfield was awake by 5, in the kitchen by 5 to 10, and standing over a griddle by 5:15, flipping pancakes for a 9-year-old who wouldn't be up for another 40 minutes. He liked the quiet of it. He liked having something to do with his hands before the day asked anything else of him. Ruby came down at 6, hair in 2 uneven braids she'd done herself, backpack already on. She climbed onto the stool at the counter and studied her father with the seriousness only children can manage before breakfast. "You look tired," she said. "I'm always tired," Owen said. "It's part of the job." "Which job? Doc or Dad?" "Both. They don't take turns." She grinned around a bite of pancake, and Owen let himself have that. The small warm thing before the day turned into whatever it was going to turn into. He rinsed the plates while she brushed her teeth, checked the weather twice out of habit though it never changed his route, and found her missing shoe under the couch, where it always seemed to end up. Small tasks, repeated so many mornings they'd worn a groove into the shape of his life, and he was grateful for every one of them. He drove her to school at 7:15, watched her disappear through the doors without looking back, the way she'd learned to do somewhere around 2nd grade, and then he drove himself to Falcon Freight Distribution on the east side of Dayton, where he had worked the loading docks for 9 years and supervised them for the last 6. Nobody at Falcon Freight knew what Owen had built before Dayton. Nobody knew about Whitfield Capital, or the blind trust that carried his name only on documents locked in a Columbus law office, or the 62% stake he held in Corvus Logistics Group, the parent company that owned Falcon Freight the way a man owns a coat he rarely wears. They knew him as the supervisor who showed up first and left last, who remembered which drivers had kids and which ones were going through something, who never raised his voice because he never needed to. Delaney Whitcomb knew him as a line item. She was 36, the regional vice president of operations for Corvus Logistics, and she had inherited the Dayton branch 8 months earlier, along with a stack of performance reviews she hadn't finished reading. She walked the dock floor that Monday morning in a blazer that didn't belong near diesel fumes, clipboard in hand, checking load times against a spreadsheet that made less sense the longer she stared at it. "Whitfield," she said, finding Owen near Bay 4. "Your numbers are clean again this quarter. How do you keep this floor moving faster than every other branch and still pass every safety audit?" "I don't do anything special," Owen said. "I just don't cut corners when nobody's watching." She almost smiled at that. Almost. Preston Kane arrived an hour later, and the temperature of the building changed the way it does before a storm nobody's been warned about. Preston was the national vice president of operations, based out of Columbus, a man who wore his authority like cologne, too much of it and impossible to ignore. He found Delaney in the break room, with a folder already open in his hand. "We have a problem," he said. "Whitfield's safety file. 2 flagged incidents this year. Forklift near miss in March. Unsecured pallet load in June. Corporate wants it handled before the quarterly board review." Delaney frowned. "I've never heard about either of those. He's the most careful supervisor on this floor. The paperwork says otherwise. And paperwork is what the board reads, not your gut feeling about the man." Preston set the folder on the table, tapped it twice. "I need a termination signed by end of day. This comes from above me, Delaney. You understand what that means? I'd like to talk to him first. Hear his side before I sign anything with his name on it. There's no time for a sit-down, and frankly, it isn't necessary. The documentation speaks for itself." Preston's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're new to this branch. I'd hate for your first quarter here to be remembered for missing a compliance deadline over a warehouse worker's feelings." She wanted to push back harder, but 8 months into a job she'd fought for, With a national vice president standing over her shoulder using the word compliance like a threat, she felt the ground under her argument give way. She didn't sign it right away. She read through the file twice, something snagging in the back of her mind that she couldn't name yet, a wrongness in the dates that she didn't have time to chase down with Preston standing over her shoulder, and the quarterly deadline breathing down both their necks. In the end, she signed it the way people sign things they've been told they have no choice about. Hand steady, stomach not. She found Owen at Bay 4 again, 20 minutes before the shift ended, and she made herself say it to his face instead of hiding behind an email. Owen Whitfield, I'm sorry. Effective immediately, your employment with Falcon Freight is terminated. I don't fully understand this file, but I have to act on it. Owen looked at her for a long moment, not with anger, just a kind of tired recognition, like a man watching a storm he'd seen building for a while finally break. I understand, he said. You're not the one who wrote that file. He unclipped his badge. He didn't ask for an explanation, because he already suspected he wouldn't get an honest one from Preston Kane, and something in Delaney's face told him she wasn't lying to him, only repeating a lie someone else had handed her. He walked out to the parking lot under a gray Ohio sky, and he reached for the phone in his jacket pocket and dialed a number he had kept saved for years and hoped he'd never need to use. The lawyer's voice on the other end was clipped, professional, already moving before Owen finished his sentence. Mr. Whitfield. It's been a while, too long, Owen said. I need the control clause activated. Corvus Logistics, Falcon Freight subsidiary. Today, there was a pause, the sound of a chair rolling back, papers shuffling. You understand what that triggers. Once we activate, this isn't quiet anymore. The board gets notified within the hour. Your name becomes visible to people who currently believe you sell insurance in Michigan. I know what it triggers. May I ask why now? You've had 2 other terminations you could have contested and didn't. Convene the board in Columbus. Tomorrow morning, whatever time works. I want Delaney Whitcomb there. She's the one who signed the termination, and she deserves to hear why from someone other than the man who handed her the pen. Understood, Mr. Whitfield. I'll have the notices out within the hour. Owen looked back at the building behind him, the dock doors, the place where he'd spent 9 years building something small and honest with his hands, after the rest of his life had gotten too large to hold. Because this time it wasn't about me, he said. Somebody wrote lies into a file with my name on it, and I want to know who and why, before they do it to somebody who can't make a phone call like this one. What almost nobody at Falcon Freight knew, what even Delaney Whitcomb had no reason to suspect, was that Owen Whitfield had built Whitfield Capital from a garage in Kettering 20 years earlier, back when his wife Claire was still alive and still laughing at his optimism over kitchen table spreadsheets. The company had grown fast, faster than either of them expected, and it had acquired a controlling interest in a regional logistics operation called Corvus, back when Corvus was 3 trucks and a warehouse lease. Owen had structured his ownership through a blind trust from the very beginning, a decision that had felt like paranoia at the time and felt like foresight now. He wanted, even then, some part of his life that money couldn't touch. His attorneys had argued against the structure for months. A blind trust made sense for a man who wanted distance from daily operations. They said, not for a founder who still wanted a hand on the wheel. Owen had insisted anyway, and over the years the trust had proven useful in ways he hadn't fully anticipated. It let him walk away from board meetings when he needed to. It let him disappear, when the time came, without anyone asking where the money had gone. Then, Claire died. A car accident on a wet road 18 months ago. Quick and senseless and permanent, and Owen had found himself standing in a house too big for 2 people, one of whom was now gone, staring at a 9-year-old girl who needed a father who showed up in normal clothes and came home at a normal hour. He'd taken the Falcon Freight job years earlier, back when Ruby was born, wanting to be a father who was present for bath time and school pickups instead of quarterly earnings calls, and Claire had supported the decision without hesitation. Losing her only deepened his resolve to stay exactly where he was. He put the trust further on autopilot, gave his attorneys stricter instructions than ever, and held on to the loading dock job under a name that was legally his but functionally invisible. He wanted Ruby to grow up believing effort mattered more than inheritance. He wanted to remember some mornings, what it felt like to earn something with his back instead of his signature. He had never planned to use the control clause. It sat in his file like a fire extinguisher behind glass, there in case of an emergency he hoped would never come. Somewhere across town, Delaney Whitcomb sat in her car outside Falcon Freight long after her shift ended, engine off, hands on the wheel, replaying the look on Owen Whitfield's face when she'd told him he was done. It wasn't anger that stayed with her, it was how little he'd fought it, like a man who'd already decided the fight wasn't with her. She thought about the dates in that file again. March, June. She was almost certain Owen had been out sick the week of the March incident, home with Ruby during a stomach flu, a detail she remembered because he'd mentioned it once, in passing, embarrassed about missing a shift. She sat with that thought a long time before she started the engine and drove home, uneasy in a way she couldn't yet put a name to. Nora Higgins found the discrepancy the next morning, though she wasn't looking for it. She was the human resources coordinator at the Dayton branch, 31 years old, quiet in the way people are quiet when they've learned that speaking up rarely changes anything and sometimes costs them their job. She was pulling Owen's file to process his final paperwork when she noticed the metadata on the March incident report. The document had been created in June, backdated to appear as though it had been filed in March. Her hands went still on the keyboard. She scrolled through the file again, slower this time, and found the same pattern on the second incident. Both reports generated within 11 minutes of each other, 3 weeks ago, long after either alleged incident supposedly happened. She should have taken it straight to Delaney. Instead, she sat with it for an hour, weighing what it would cost her to say something against what it would cost her conscience to stay quiet. She thought about her mortgage, about the 2 years standing between her and a vested pension, about how easily a woman who noticed the wrong things could find herself the subject of the next backdated file. She thought, too, about Owen Whitfield, who had never once made her feel small in 6 years of walking past her desk, who always said good morning like he meant it. In the end, her conscience won, though it took her until lunch to work up the nerve to knock on Delaney's office door. "I need to show you something," Nora said, laptop under her arm, voice lower than she meant it to be. "It's about Owen Whitfield's file." Delaney waved her in and shut the door herself, which told Nora something before either of them said another word. They didn't get far. Preston Kane appeared in the hallway outside less than 10 minutes later, knocking once before letting himself in, his smile arriving a half-second before the rest of him did. "Nora, don't you have exit paperwork to process? I was just, whatever it is, it's not your department." His voice stayed pleasant, which somehow made it worse. "I'd hate for anyone here to get tangled up in something above their pay grade, especially somebody 2 years from a pension vesting date." Nora closed her laptop. She didn't argue. She left the office with her hands shaking slightly, and the metadata screenshots still saved to a folder on her desktop, unsure if she'd just protected herself or failed the one person who'd never once been unkind to her on that floor. That evening, Owen sat at the kitchen table while Ruby did math homework across from him, the two of them working in a companionable silence that had become their language since Claire died. Ruby looked up at one point. Pencil paused. "You didn't go to work today?" "No," Owen said. "I didn't." "Are you in trouble?" He considered lying to make it simple, and then decided she deserved better than that, even at 9. "Somebody made a mistake about me," he said. "A big one. I'm going to fix it, but it might take a few days, and it might get a little loud before it gets quiet again." Ruby studied him the way she'd studied him over pancakes, weighing the truth of it. "Are we going to be okay?" "We're always going to be okay," Owen said, and for the first time all day, he believed it himself. After Ruby went to bed, Owen sat alone on the back porch with the light off, the way he did on nights that stirred something old in him. He thought about Claire, about the version of this fight she would have relished, the way she used to tease him for hiding his own success like it embarrassed him. She'd never understood why he wanted to be invisible. He hadn't fully understood it himself until she was gone, and invisibility became the only place he felt steady enough to raise their daughter. Tomorrow he'd have to be visible again, in front of a room full of people who'd spent years assuming he didn't exist. He wasn't looking forward to it, but he thought of the backdated file with his name typed across the top, and he knew he wasn't going to let it stand. Delaney's phone rang the next morning before she'd even reached her office. A Columbus number she didn't recognize. "Miss Whitcomb, This is the office of Marsh & Cole. We represent a controlling shareholder of Corvus Logistics Group, who has requested your presence at an emergency board session tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, the Columbus headquarters. I'm sorry, a shareholder requested me specifically? Yes, ma'am. Your attendance is not optional. She sat in her car in the parking lot for a full 5 minutes before she trusted herself to drive, the same uneasy feeling from 2 nights ago blooming into something closer to dread. The drive to Columbus took an hour and 10 minutes, and Delaney spent most of it rehearsing explanations for a meeting whose purpose she still didn't understand. She'd barely slept, running through every possibility, none of them good. A compliance failure surfacing from her first quarter. A merger she hadn't been briefed on. Her own termination, maybe, dressed up as a courtesy instead of an ambush. The Corvus Logistics headquarters occupied 4 floors of a glass building downtown, and when she stepped off the elevator into the executive conference room, she found it already half full. Board members she recognized from annual reports and a few she'd only seen in press photographs, all of them wearing the particular stillness of people who'd been told something urgent without being told what. Preston Kane was there too, seated near the head of the table, jacket buttoned, trying to project calm and mostly succeeding, though Delaney had spent enough years reading rooms to notice the tightness around his eyes. Does anyone know what this is about? She asked, sliding into an open chair. Routine governance review, Preston said too quickly. Nothing to be concerned about, but nothing about the room felt routine. There was a folder at every seat, unopened, and a projector screen still dark at the front of the room, and the kind of silence that happens when powerful people are waiting for someone else to speak first. Delaney opened the folder in front of her out of nerves more than purpose, and the first page stopped her cold. A shareholder registry. Corvus Logistics Group, controlling interest, 62%, held by the Whitfield Family Trust. Trustee of record Marsh & Cole LLP. Beneficial owner O. Whitfield. Her stomach dropped somewhere near the floor. O. Whitfield. She thought about the man she'd fired 2 days ago, standing calm and unbothered on a dock floor, saying I understand like it cost him nothing. She thought about 9 years of employment history she'd never bothered to read past the first page. She turned to the woman beside her, a board member she vaguely recognized. This Whitfield, in the registry. Is that Owen Whitfield? The woman said, glancing at her folder. Founder of Whitfield Capital. Very private man. Hasn't attended a board function in almost 2 years. Not since his wife passed. Why do you ask? Delaney didn't answer. She was too busy replaying every interaction she'd ever had with the dock supervisor from Bay 4, hunting for the moment she should have known and finding nothing. No clue at all, just a man who showed up early and left late, and never once let on that he owned the floor he was sweeping. The board chair called the room to order a few minutes later, and the meeting that followed was unlike any Delaney had sat through in her career. A senior partner from Marsh & Cole walked the room through a financial audit that had been quietly conducted over the past 48 hours, by the activation of an emergency shareholder clause. The audit traced a pattern of inflated freight contracts across 3 regional branches, all approved under Preston Kane's signature, all routed through a shipping vendor that, on closer inspection, turned out to be partially owned by Preston's brother-in-law. Over 18 months, the markup on those contracts had quietly siphoned close to $900,000 away from margins the board had been told were shrinking due to fuel costs. Preston's calm finally cracked. This is absurd. I've run national operations for 6 years without a single complaint from this board. You've run it well enough to avoid scrutiny, the senior partner said, unbothered. That's not the same thing as running it honestly. He clicked to the next slide, and the room went quieter still. 2 personnel files, side by side, both belonging to Owen Whitfield, both showing safety incidents backdated to disguise the true date they were created, both signed off within the same 11-minute window, 3 weeks earlier, the same week Preston Kane had visited the Dayton branch for what he'd told Delaney was a routine site inspection. We believe, the senior partner said, that Mr. Kane manufactured cause to terminate a Falcon Freight employee whose ownership stake he was unaware of, in order to remove a supervisor whose meticulous record-keeping was making certain freight discrepancies harder to hide. Delaney sat very still, hands folded in her lap, understanding now why her signature had felt so wrong the moment she'd put it to paper. She'd been the tool someone else had used to swing the hammer, and she hadn't even known whose hand was really on the handle. Preston tried one more angle, sharper now, cornered. If any documents were falsified, that's an HR matter for the branch. Miss Whitcomb signed the termination. She's the one who acted on it. Every head in the room turned toward Delaney, and for a moment the accusation hung there, waiting to see if it would stick to her instead of him. I signed what I was told to sign, based on a file I was told was accurate, Delaney said, her voice steadier than she felt. I've worked here 8 months. Mr. Kane has worked here 6 years. I'd ask this board to consider whose signature actually built that file. The senior partner nodded, unmoved by Preston's attempt to redirect, and reached for a folder at the bottom of his stack. There's one more matter the board should hear before any decision is made. The side door opened, and a man walked in wearing a plain gray jacket that looked nothing like the suits filling the rest of the room, and for a moment nobody recognized him at all, until Delaney did, all at once, her breath catching somewhere in her chest. Owen Whitfield crossed the room without hurry, the same unbothered calm he'd carried on the dock floor, and took a seat at the head of the table, like a man returning to furniture he'd simply been away from for a while. He didn't look at Preston. He looked at Delaney first, briefly, something unreadable passing behind his eyes, and then he nodded to the senior partner. Go ahead, he said. Let her finish it. Delaney opened her mouth, an apology already forming, but Owen raised a hand, not unkindly. Not yet, he said. There's somebody else who has more to say than either of us. He gestured toward the door, and a moment later Nora Higgins stepped in, laptop clutched against her chest like a shield, looking as though she'd rather be anywhere else on Earth and had decided to come anyway. Miss Higgins found the discrepancy in my file 2 days ago, Owen said, and was told by Mr. Kane that it wasn't her department. I'd like the board to hear what she found. Nora's hands trembled as she connected her laptop to the projector, but her voice steadied the moment the first screenshot appeared on the screen. Metadata timestamps laid out in stark, undeniable rows. She walked the board through what she'd noticed. The backdated creation dates, the 11-minute window, the way both incident reports referenced dock conditions that hadn't existed on the days they claimed to describe. I checked the March date against the shift schedule, Nora said. Owen Whitfield called out sick that entire week. He wasn't even in the building the day this report says he caused a forklift near miss. The room was silent except for the hum of the projector fan. Preston's face had gone the color of the folder in front of him. A board member near the window leaned forward. Miss Higgins, why didn't you bring this to the board directly rather than waiting? I tried to bring it to my regional VP, Nora said. I was told it wasn't my department. I didn't have a way to reach this room on my own. I'm not sure I would have found the nerve even if I had. There's more, Nora said, and Owen watched her find a courage he suspected she hadn't known she had until that exact moment. The freight vendor mentioned in the audit, the one connected to Mr. Kane's brother-in-law. I cross-referenced it against dock intake logs going back 14 months. Every shipment routed through that vendor was logged by Owen Whitfield personally, because he insisted on double-checking incoming freight weights himself. If anyone was going to notice the numbers didn't add up, it was always going to be him. I think that's exactly why Mr. Kane wanted him gone. Preston stood so fast his chair scraped backward across the floor. This is a coordinated attack. She's been coached. He's been coached. He pointed at Owen. You planted an employee in your own warehouse to spy on operations. And now you're staging a public humiliation because your ego couldn't take being treated like a normal worker for once. I wasn't spying on anyone, Owen said, voice even, unhurried. I was raising my daughter. You made that harder than it needed to be, and then you tried to erase a man's 19-year record because he was better at his job than you were at hiding yours. The board chair called for an immediate vote on Preston's suspension pending full investigation, and it passed without a single dissent. 7 votes cast in less time than it had taken Nora to load her laptop. Security arrived within minutes to escort Preston Kane from the building. He didn't go quietly, not at first, insisting all the way to the elevator that this was a misunderstanding, that the board would regret acting on the word of a warehouse supervisor and a nervous HR coordinator, that he'd built half of what Corvus Logistics had become. Nobody in the room answered him. True to the promise made in a parking lot 2 days earlier, he never again sat in that office. Delaney watched it happen with a strange, hollow feeling in her chest. relief and shame arriving together and refusing to separate. When the room finally cleared, when the board members filed out murmuring to each other, and Nora slipped away looking equal parts terrified and lighter than she had all week, Delaney found herself alone with Owen at the far end of the conference table. "I don't know where to start," she said. "You don't have to start anywhere," Owen said. "You didn't write that file. You didn't backdate anything. You believed the wrong person, and you weren't the only one in this building who did. I still fired you. To your face. I meant every apology I gave you on that dock floor, and it still wasn't enough." Owen was quiet for a moment, weighing something. "You're not wrong for trusting someone you had every reason to trust," he said finally. "You're only wrong if you stop trusting your own judgment because of it. That file bothered you before Nora ever walked into your office. You told me so yourself, without meaning to, the day you signed it. I could hear it in your voice." Delaney looked at him for a long moment, seeing him differently now. Not the anonymous dock supervisor she'd fired on a Monday morning. Not the mysterious name on a shareholder registry, but simply a man who had waited 9 years for a fight he clearly hadn't wanted, and had only picked it up when someone tried to hurt more than just him. 3 days later, Delaney drove back to Dayton with a folder of her own, this one containing a formal offer of reinstatement, full back pay, and a written apology from Corvus Logistics Group. She found Owen at home this time, not at the warehouse, in a modest ranch house on the edge of town, with a basketball hoop over the garage and a bicycle with training wheels leaned against the porch rail. He read the offer at his kitchen table, unhurried, the same way he seemed to do everything, and then he set it down. "I appreciate this," he said. "I don't want the supervisor job back." Delaney blinked. "I don't understand. It's your company. You could take any job in the building." "That's exactly why I don't want it," Owen said. "The moment I go back with everyone knowing who I am, it stops being a job and starts being a performance. I liked being the guy who showed up early because he wanted to, not because a title required it." He paused. "But I'd take a different offer. Stay on as a consultant for the Dayton branch. Help rebuild the safety reporting system so nobody's file can be quietly rewritten again, and I'd want you running it. You handled that boardroom better than most people twice your age would have. You're offering me a promotion 2 days after I fired you." "I'm offering you a job because you're good at it," Owen said. "The firing was somebody else's lie. I try not to hold people accountable for other people's lies." It was Ruby who broke whatever formality remained between them, wandering into the kitchen in socked feet and stopping short at the sight of a stranger at the table. "Is this the trouble you were talking about?" she asked her father, looking Delaney over with the same frank assessment she gave everything. "This is the trouble getting fixed," Owen said. "Delaney, this is my daughter Ruby. Ruby, this is Miss Whitcomb. She used to be my boss." "Used to be," Ruby repeated, delighted by the phrase. "Are you staying for dinner? Dad makes really good spaghetti when he's not stressed about work stuff." Delaney glanced at Owen, half expecting him to rescue her from the invitation, and found instead that he was watching her with an expression that wasn't rescue at all. Something quieter, something that looked a little bit like hope he wasn't ready to name yet. "I'd like that," Delaney said. "If your dad doesn't mind." "He doesn't mind," Ruby said, already heading for the pantry. "He never minds when people stay." The formal investigation into Preston Kane closed 5 weeks later. Corvus Logistics terminated him for cause, forfeiting the severance package his contract would otherwise have guaranteed, and referred the vendor fraud findings to the district attorney's office for review. Delaney read the closing memo standing in the Dayton break room, the same room where Preston had once told her a fabricated file was simply paperwork the board would read. She felt no satisfaction in it, only a quiet settling, the sense of a door finally closing on something that should never have been left open in the first place. Over the following weeks, the two of them fell into a working rhythm neither had quite expected. Delaney relocated her office to the Dayton branch 3 days a week, and she and Owen spent long afternoons rebuilding the safety reporting protocol from the ground up, cross-checking every file that had passed through Preston Kane's hands over the past 2 years, restoring 3 other employees whose records, it turned out, had been quietly altered the same way Owen's had been. One was a forklift operator named Deacon who'd been passed over for a promotion based on a fabricated tardiness log. Another was a young mother on the packing line whose maternity leave had been mischaracterized as unauthorized absence. Each correction felt smaller than the last, and each one mattered exactly as much as the first. Nora Higgins was promoted to branch HR director, a title she wore at first like a coat 2 sizes too large, and grew into within a month, steady and sharp, in a way that made Delaney wonder how long her instincts had gone unheard before someone finally listened. The company itself changed in smaller ways too. Corvus Logistics instituted an anonymous audit line, run through an outside firm, so no employee's record could be altered without a second set of eyes verifying the date. Delaney presented it to the board herself, and for the first time in 8 months, nobody in that room made her feel like she was borrowing a seat that belonged to someone else. Owen and Delaney kept working alongside each other long after the immediate crisis had passed, the kind of proximity that builds trust in increments too small to notice until they've become something larger. He fixed the chain on Ruby's bicycle one Saturday, while Delaney sat on the porch steps grading a stack of vendor contracts, and Ruby, without any particular ceremony, asked if Delaney wanted to stay for pancakes the next morning too, and Delaney found she very much did. She started noticing things about the house that told her more than Owen ever said out loud. A photograph of Claire on the hallway shelf, dusted but never moved. A drawer in the kitchen that still held a woman's handwriting on index cards. Recipes nobody used anymore but nobody had the heart to throw away. Delaney never asked about any of it directly. She simply let it exist alongside whatever she and Owen were becoming. Understanding. In a way she couldn't have explained a year earlier, that grief and new beginnings could share the same house without one crowding out the other. One evening, after Ruby had gone up to bed, and the dishes were drying in the rack, Delaney found herself telling Owen something she hadn't told anyone at Corvus. She'd taken the Dayton position after a divorce that had quietly gutted her confidence. A marriage where she'd spent 6 years being told her ambition was the problem. She'd fought for this branch because she needed to prove, mostly to herself, that she could run something without anyone standing over her shoulder rewriting the terms. "That's part of why I hate that I signed that termination," she admitted. "It felt like I'd become the thing I left." Owen didn't offer easy comfort. He just listened, the way he seemed to listen to everything, like her words mattered enough to sit with instead of immediately fixing. "You didn't become anything," he said finally. "You caught it. Most people wouldn't have noticed the dates were wrong in the first place. You did, even before you knew why it mattered." It wasn't a grand moment. No music swelled, no hands touched. But something settled between them that night. A kind of trust that didn't need announcing. Neither of them said anything about what was growing between them, not for weeks, not through the shared coffee at 7 in the morning, or the long drives back from Columbus after board meetings that ran too late, or the evening Owen taught her, patiently and without judgment, how to throw a spiral to a 9-year-old who wanted to play catch before dinner. It lived instead in the small things. The way Owen always poured her coffee before his own, the way Delaney started leaving her blazer in the car and walking the dock floor in jeans, the way Ruby had started drawing 3 figures in her family pictures instead of 2. On a Friday evening, 6 weeks after the board meeting that had upended both their lives, Owen and Delaney stood together near Bay 4, watching the last truck of the day pull out under a sky gone orange at the edges. The warehouse had changed since Preston Kane's suspension, not in any way a stranger would notice, but in every way that mattered to the people who worked there. Reports were filed the day they happened. Nobody flinched when a supervisor walked the floor. Trust, once broken, had been rebuilt one honest signature at a time. Delaney had a folder tucked under her arm, the last one of the day, this one containing nothing more urgent than next quarter's maintenance schedule. She'd started carrying fewer folders that felt like verdicts and more that felt like plans. It was a small distinction, but she noticed it, the way she noticed most things about the last 2 months. "You ever miss it?" she asked. "Being just the guy who fixed the pallets nobody else wanted to fix?" "Some days," Owen admitted, "but I don't miss pretending the rest of it didn't exist." That got heavier every year, not lighter. Ruby came running down the loading ramp, still in her school backpack, and grabbed one of each of their hands without a word, the way children do when they've decided something the adults haven't caught up to yet. Owen looked at Delaney over their daughter's head, and Delaney looked back, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all, because nothing needed saying. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It hadn't been for weeks. He hadn't made that phone call from the parking lot to reclaim a company, or to win a fight, or to prove a point to a man who'd never once earned the truth. He'd made it because somewhere between the coffee maker groaning at 5 in the morning and a 9-year-old asking if they were going to be okay, he'd remembered exactly what was still worth protecting, and he wasn't going to let anyone quietly take it from him again.